What's up, y'all? I'm Jordy, and today I want to talk about IVs. There's been a lot of speculation recently that the concept of IVs is going to be basically eliminated when Pokémon Champions comes out. And while we don't know that for sure, it has caused a lot of debate. So I want to jump in here and explain to you why, in my opinion, IVs kind of suck, actually. To get started, I'll give a little bit of background on what IVs are and the history behind them, just in case anyone isn't fully aware. Then we'll go into why this conversation is even coming up, why we think IVs might be disappearing in Pokémon Champions. And finally, the bulk of this presentation is going to be what happens if they are making this change, and is it good? In my opinion, probably, but we'll see if I can get you all to agree with that. Okay, so what the heck is an IV? IVs are secret numbers that make your Pokemon totally unique from each other. Each stat's going to get a value between 0 and 31. Sometimes that can be forced, in most cases it's purely random. And those 0 to 31 points give you a free stat boost. And there's no cost to it. It's not like if one IV is 31, another one has to be lower. They can all be max 31 if you want, which is basically 15 free points in every stat. At level 50, where VGC is, different levels is a little bit different. And in the games, this is basically a super secret. Like, they'll tell you a little bit about the concept of Pokemon being all different, but like, they're never going to talk about the numbers specifically, and there's no way without an outside resource to really tell what your Pokemon's IVs are, because the Pokemon Company doesn't want to talk about it for some reason. So that's a big reason why there isn't much information available to a casual audience. Now, if IVs are just free points in all your stats, why don't you just go max to everything, and why is this even a discussion? Well, it's because imperfect IVs actually can do a lot for you. If you want to be slower, you can have a low speed IV. This will help you move first when Trick Room is up, which is a big part of the Trick Room strategy, but it can also do some other niche things, like boost the power of your Gyro Ball, which depends on your speed relative to the target, or if you want to move last on purpose, for example, if you're using the move Payback, which will do more damage if your target has already moved, or if you're like an Aegislash and you want to take a hit in shield form before you turn into blade form when you attack. You could also intentionally make your Pokemon weaker in its attack stat, usually, if you want to take less damage from Foul Play, which will use your own attacking stat, or when you hit yourself in Confusion, that uses your attacking stat, or if you're attacking one of your ally Pokemon to either beat up and annihilate or trigger a weakness policy, you might want to have a lower attack or special attack IV to do less damage to yourself, basically. And finally, there are some other niche scenarios. If you have a Pokemon with Endeavor, which will bring the opponent's HP down to your HP, you might want to have lower defense or HP IVs so you can get down to 1 HP more easily with a Focus Sash. Same deal with Unburden. If you're running a Focus Sash, you want to trigger the Sash so you can activate your Unburden and get a double speed from activating your item. If you live a hit naturally, that will never activate. And there's some other niche strats that don't usually come up, but they are a thing. So, why do we think IVs are gone? Well, in a couple of Pokémon Champions trailers, we've seen a few Pokemon that have been recruited. Recruited Pokemon are Pokemon that you get inside Pokémon Champions the game, rather than transferring them from other games through Pokémon Home. And these Pokemon have stats that are equivalent to having a 31 IV in every stat across the board. So they're perfect in every way, unless you want to do these reduced stats, which a lot of them probably would. Now, that's all the evidence we have. We don't know what happens if you transfer in a Pokemon from home. Maybe it keeps its IVs. We don't know if there's a menu we haven't seen where you can edit IVs up or down. And if you can change IVs to any value, then I think that's ideal. I think everyone would be happy. I would be happy with that. People who like IVs would be happy with that. But as I was saying, the Pokemon Company doesn't like talking about these, so I really think that's unlikely. However, this trailer is all the evidence we have. I don't know if that's really enough. PP ups are gone too, I guess, because we didn't see any PP ups in the trailer. And also, what's up with this Whimsicott? Why would you recruit a Whimsicott that doesn't even have Tailwind? You're gonna have to buy the Whimsicott to try it out. You can't just test recruit with that. That's terrible. Solar Beam and not even Chlorophyll? Like, what? Come on. So, what if IVs are gone forever, and all Pokemon are just treated as if they have a perfect 31 in every stat? Well, some people would say IVs are complicated, so that's great. It's way too confusing to have to mess with these stats. I really don't care about that. I don't know. What I do care about is how hard it is to get weird IVs. Like, you need a weird specific speed stat, or you need a 0 attack, or you need a 0 speed. If you're breeding, it's not that bad, but on a legendary Pokemon, especially one that's deep into a game that you have to rerun, that's a huge pain, and we'll talk about that. But one downside of this would be there are some fun strategies that will be taken away or at least nerfed slightly if they buff all IVs to 31 all the time. But is that really worth it? We'll talk about that too. Now, onto the first point, that IVs are super complicated. I see so many people talk about this, and it supports my argument, but it's not my argument. IVs are not complicated, honestly. If you think they're too hard to understand, you need to get good. I want them gone because they're a barrier to entry, not skill-based, but actually obtaining the Pokemon. So this I just do not care about. Get good. Alright, now we're into the real stuff that really makes me upset about IVs and why something needs to change. Alright, bottle caps do exist. What they do is they allow you to hypertrain a stat to make it effectively a 31, so if you have lower stats you can make them perfect, but you can never make them lower than perfect with that. Some people do talk about, some is a lot actually, a potential rusty bottle cap, which could potentially bring an IV down to 0. While that would help in a lot of cases because you do sometimes want a minimum stat, that doesn't fix the entire situation. Like I said, what if I want a 4 IV Calyrex? I can't rusty bottle cap that, which at the moment doesn't even exist, and buffing it to 31 won't help. I just have to catch one that's perfect. And talking about legendaries, oh boy, that's where the real problem comes in. If you can breed a Pokemon, getting specific IVs on it is a little difficult, but really not that bad in the long run. The real problem is legendary Pokemon, and I guess also mythical Pokemon, but those are usually not available in VGC anyway. They're 1 per save, so if you catch one and you keep it, if you want another one, you gotta run all the way through the game again. So I really hope you like the Crown Tundra, because there's some stuff there you might want. Calyrex specifically is one I keep bringing up, because Calyrex Shadow Rider will pretty much always want a 0 attack IV. But Calyrex Ice Rider will use a lot of different IVs, not the same as the Shadow Rider Calyrex, because you do not want a 0 attack on that one. You'll want to hypertrain your attack on that one. And you might want 0 speed. You might want a 2 IV in speed. And then a lot of the time, Calyrex does run a perfect speed, but if you hypertrain your Calyrex, you're locked out of ever using the min speed one unless you go play that game a 3rd or 4th time. And just to make it a little bit harder, 3 stats on legendary Pokemon are forced to be 31 at random, in modern Pokemon games at least. And there are some exceptions to this. The Snacksworth legendaries don't have this restraint, but Calyrex, for example, does have this restraint. And that just makes everything a lot harder for you, because you want the 0 speed, but half of the time you're going to be automatically given a 31 speed and just have to reset basically twice as often. And then the worst offender probably in the history of Pokemon is Enamorus. Enamorus is only catchable outside of Pokemon Go, which was a limited time event, was only catchable in Legends Arceus. And to catch it in Legends Arceus, you have to beat the entire game plus a bunch of post-game. And then when you catch it, you can't check its IV until you transfer it to home. So if you hope to have an Enamorus Therian with a low speed IV, maybe you don't even care about a 0, but you just want it to be super low, you're going to have to just transfer it and hope. And then if you didn't get it, you have to play the game again. You can't even reset. So it's a huge pain. And then finally, this also somewhat applies to shinies, but it doesn't be made all equal. Like, if you get a shiny Rillaboom, congrats, give it bottle caps, put all its stats to 31, go into battle, you should be happy most of the time. But if you get a shiny Hatterene, ooh, that's too bad, bro. If you don't have a 0 speed on your Hatterene, you're not going to be slower than a Mungus, and that's kind of a really important thing that Hatterene does, with its 29 base speed being 1 point slower than a Mungus. And as a special attacker, it wouldn't hurt to have a low attack IV as well, which chances are if you caught a shiny, it's not that. Alright, moving on to the arguments for why IVs should remain as they are. Trick Room does get changed, but honestly, I'm going to try to convince you that it's not that bad. It is much different, obviously. Speed tiers will be affected, you're going to have to relearn numbers, and there are some interesting consequences of this. For example, every Amoonguss is a 27 IV Amoonguss now. I'll explain what that means in a little bit if you don't understand. But there's also some other changes. Foul play is buffed, but in my opinion, that's fine. They could buff foul play if they want. Confusion is also buffed, so swag play back on the table maybe? Hopefully not. Self-targeting is nerfed, and that I am upset about. Hopefully that doesn't discourage people from trying out weakness policy or beat up shenanigans. And weird stuff like Endure Toxic Orb Tatsugiri gets nerfed, but no one was playing that seriously anyway. And then Endeavor being nerfed, that's about the same level as like Foul Play or Confusion being buffed. It's just game balance changes. I don't think Endeavor was too strong anyway, and the nerf isn't that bad, so I could go either way on that one. Alright, I'm sure the people who have already been ranting and raving in my comments before getting to this part of the video are all the Trick Room players, so I want to talk to you now, the Trick Room players, because Trick Room is a little bit different. I've listed here some speed tiers from the new system where you have to have a 31 IV in speed. Min speed Torkoal is now 36, still the slowest viable thing you're ever going to see. Min speed Hatterene 44, min speed Amoonguss 45, so it's still slower than Amoonguss. Neutral Amoonguss hits 50 speed, and min speed Iron Hands, a base 50, is 63. I think you've probably noticed, neutral Amoonguss is now always slower than min speed base 50s. Now, a very common strategy lately has been to have Amoonguss with a 27 speed IV and a neutral nature. That will guarantee you're 1 point slower than base 50 speed Pokemon such as Iron Hands, Calyrex Ice Rider, Ursaluna, King Gambit. 50 is pretty crowded. Now, what I was saying, every Amoonguss is 27 IV Amoonguss, because your Amoonguss, unless you invest a decent amount of speed into it, is already going to be slower than min 50s. So that's what I'm talking about. The speed tiers are different. This will affect game balance. I'm not convinced it affects it in a negative way. Like, Trick Room will still be good, trust me. You can use your slow Pokemon, you bring out Torkoal in Trick Room and click Choice Specs Eruption, you're still winning the game when you got into that position. But there are also a lot of other interesting consequences with the speed tiers, which we'll talk about now. The first consequence I want to talk about is how avoiding tying with yourself has a small cost now. Now, this is a relatively common situation, maybe not a crazy common one, but Iron Hands and Calyrex Ice Rider are both very powerful Pokemon inside of Trick Room. However, they have the exact same base speed. So if you went minimum speed Iron Hands and minimum speed Calyrex Ice Rider, and you had them on the field at the same time, you can't predict who's moving first. And that could potentially cost you a game because you can't control your own Pokemon. So what you would sometimes see is min speed Iron Hands, so under Trick Room it'll move first, and then the Calyrex bumps up its speed IV slightly, so it's no longer minimum speed, but it's still very slow, and will guarantee to move after Iron Hands. And that order would be the more common order to go with, because Iron Hands can use a single target move to weaken one of the opponents, and then Calyrex can use its Spread Glacial Lance to pick up a KO on that opponent, and maybe the other opponent as well, and get attack boosts from its As-1 ability. Nowadays, if 31 IVs across the board is the new rule, it'll be slightly different but still possible. Min speed Iron Hands here on the left hits 63 speed now, and Calyrex Ice Rider will have to invest 2 stat points equivalent into speed to get up to 64. Now, it's 2 points because if you know anything about speed bumps from nature, negative natures also have negative bumps, so the first stat point would bring you from 63 still to 63. The second stat point will then bring you up to 64, just due to the way natures work. Because neutral nature, you would be 70 speed down to 63 by dropping 10%, but if you go up to 71, then you lose 8 points, and then if you go up to 72, you still lose 8 points, and you end up here at 64. Hopefully that made sense. So basically, you're sacrificing 2 points in any of your stats, HP, attack, which will be a very negligible amount, honestly, It'll slightly change damage rolls here or there, but it's just a very small cost and a small nerf to Trick Room, I guess, by like 1 or 2 points occasionally if you want to use this strategy on Pokemon with a negative nature whose speed stats end in 0. Another reason outside of Trick Room that you might manipulate your speed stat is somewhat commonly seen on Incineroar. If you have a slightly slower Incineroar than the opponent's Incineroar, you can use Parting Shot after them to make sure that you bring in something into a better board state and it doesn't get its stats lowered by their Parting Shot. It's kind of a niche strategy, but they did distribute an Incineroar that was Wolf's Incineroar that had this strategy going on it. Nowadays, if you want to do that, you're going to have to be brave. You can also invest some speed points on your Brave Incineroar if you want to creep back up to that number without going over it, but it is a slight balance change. It is a slight nerf to Incineroar. I think Incineroar will take it. But oh no, min speed Incineroar now hits 72 speed. And you know what? A common speed tier, base 50, that naturally hits 70. And even with the 4 investment from the free stat from the old system, you're going to be at 71. You are now faster than neutral Kingambit. So Kingambit can underspeed you. Your minimum speed Incineroar cannot catch neutral Kingambit. Well, that'll change game plans, won't it? Well, I don't know about that. Because Kingambit always had the option to be slower than minimum speed Incineroar. With the 0 IV, Incineroar can get down to 58. And as you can see on the right, Kingambit doesn't even have to invest in a negative nature if it can invest in just getting a lower IV to be slower than Incineroar at all times. You will never see a Kingambit with this exact speed stat, but just as an example, I'm just explaining to you, Kingambit, being a slower base speed than Incineroar, always had the option to be slower. And these speed tier changes do change a little bit. It does feel like a slight nerf to Trick Room, and that may be the case, but the opponent could always have been slower, and the slower Pokemon always has the option to be the slower Pokemon. Now on to a more niche consequence of this change. Previously, when you were allowed to have a 0 IV in speed, Pokemon that end their speed stat in 5 and Pokemon that end their speed stat in 6, such as the base 45 speed Tinglu and the base 46 speed Enamorous Therian, assuming you can actually get a minimum speed Enamorous Therian. Good luck with that one, by the way. Use hacks. And anything else, 35, 36, 55, 56, they will actually speed tie because of that reverse bump I was talking about earlier. Now, with the new system, they don't speed tie anymore. We've got base 45 Tinglu, its new minimum speed is 58, but Enamorous Therian's new minimum speed is 59. So they actually got separated out, which in my opinion is a pretty good thing, because there's not very many relevant ones here, but there were a couple. If only it was that simple though, because now base that end in 0 and end in 1 do speed tie at minimum speed. The first example I got, starting from the lowest speed that seemed relevant to me, was all the way up at base 60 and 61 with Sylveon and Tyranitar. So a lot of Pokemon that actually are played in Trick Room, this never will come up for them. In fact, it seems like it would come up less in this new system than in the old system, but it's a little bit of a wash. Here we've got Sylveon, minimum speed of 72. You might get tricked by this at some point if you're like, I know Sylveon is base 60 and I'm min speed Sylveon, and I know Tyranitar is base 61, so even if they're min speed, I should be moving first. No, you both have 72 base speed if you're minimum speed, so you need to watch out for that. Will this ever happen? Probably once to like one person, but just gotta keep in mind this is something that can happen. Now, how about speed calculations with Iron Ball? What Iron Ball does is, first of all, it grounds the user, but there's also options in the power items that won't ground the user, and it halves your speed stat rounded down, so you can become super slow on pretty much any Pokemon. Previously, this was somewhat common, maybe not common, but it was used on Urshifu Dark, because under Trick Room, the opponent want to protect a lot, and Urshifu being able to punch through Protect so you're not wasting Trick Room turns is a pretty good thing. But Urshifu is really fast at base 97, so it needs to be slowed down with something like an Iron Ball. And its minimum speed with a 0 is 91. When you have that, it rounds down to 45, and then Calyrex Ice and other base 50s are at 49, so you actually are able to move before them in Trick Room. But now, Urshifu's minimum speed is 105, which when you cut that in half is 52. And Calyrex Ice Rider and other base 50s, their new min speed is 63. Oh, Urshifu can still move before Calyrex Ice Rider and base 50s with an Iron Ball. So that strategy right there will still work. You may not be catching Amoonguss, but again, Amoonguss always has the option in the current meta to be 31 speed, which Urshifu with Iron Ball was never going to catch anyway. But I hope you didn't think it was always that simple, because now something with these 31 IVs across the board, something new can happen. Iron Ball Calyrex is now capable of underspeeding min speed Torkoal. This was not possible when everyone can go down to 0, but because stats are boosted a little bit across the board at the low numbers, having does a little bit more of an effect. So we can now have Calyrex have its speed, and it'll be significantly slower now than Torkoal, whose new min speed is 36. So Torkoal actually has to watch out now. Though I don't think this is going to be very common at all, just saying. So with Trick Room out of the way, let's briefly touch on all of the other balance changes we're going to run into with this circumstances. Endeavor shenanigans are nerfed. This here on the right is a Diglett I used in an official tournament. It has minimum HP and minimum both defenses so that it can get down to Focus Sash as easily as possible. And if it doesn't take a hit, its maximum HP will be as low as possible so that when it uses Endeavor, it can bring down the opponent a lot. It's definitely a nerf, but in the case of Diglett specifically, it's not much of a nerf because I don't know if you've seen Diglett stats, it didn't have much to begin with. Huge shout out to Aquamoth for helping me get this Diglett, by the way. Foul Play is also changed in balance in this. For example, a max HP 4 defense Calyrex Shadow Rider would live Grimmsnarl's Foul Play most of the time, only like a 6% chance to get the knockout, and that's a 4 times effective stab move. But if Calyrex Shadow Rider is forced to run a 31 attack IV, this now has a very high chance to KO, and this is a very bulky spread on this Calyrex, so it's unlikely that they'll be able to live this hit unless they're Focus Sash or something. Honestly deserved. I like Foul Play getting buffed, honestly, across the board. I think it being a better move is good for the meta, because it's supposed to punish Pokemon for having a high attack stat. And if the Pokemon Company decides, hey, this special attacker also has a high attack stat, they're intending for it to be punished by that. So I think it's fine either way, honestly. If they also want to lower the damage output of Foul Play, that's their prerogative. Now, the one thing I'm a little sad about is that self-targeting becomes nerfed. If you want to trigger your own weakness policy, which is really funny, you're going to take a little bit more damage, and a couple other shenanigans like activating your own stamina or powering up your own Rage Fist. It's not like the damage increase to this is irrelevant. Like, even on this Diglett here, I had Sucker Punch on this Diglett with a minus attack nature and a 0 attack IV, so that I would do as little damage as possible to my, I believe it was Terra Ghost weakness policy Miraidon. So I would do a little bit more damage in this scenario now, and that's not good for the strategy, but I really don't think it will kill it. I think players will adapt, and that little extra damage nerf to weakness policy isn't the end of the world, especially if we get back to a Dynamax format where weakness policy is really strong. Alright, we've reached the end. In conclusion, if they let us alter IVs freely, I'm totally cool with that. I have no problem with a slider bar for IVs, we just haven't seen one yet. If they force all of IVs to be max, I'm actually totally chill with that too. That's what I was explaining here. Things will be different, but they're not going to be bad. And finally, if they keep IVs as is, that's the worst scenario, and I'm going to go be hunting for Calyrexes for the rest of my life. Now tell me what you think down in the comments below. Be nice to all the Trick Room players. They know not what they say. But also, huge shout out to Jon-Luke VGC. I'll link their video in the description below. They also talked about IVs, They had a slightly different opinion than me, but that's okay. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. But anyways, I'm Jordy, and alright, peace.